Hello and welcome to the Estate Planning Toolbox. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to check out everything we have going on here. My name is John Connor and I am an attorney in the Trust and Estates Group of Graves, Doherty, Heron & Moody, a law firm located in downtown Austin, Texas. This podcast is a client-focused podcast covering various estate planning topics, including wills and trusts, powers of attorney, corporate entities such as LLCs and limited partnerships, probate administration, and everything in between. Thanks very much for stopping by. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Estate Planning Toolbox. I am very excited about today's podcast because today we are kicking off a series talking all about the Texas Probate Process. We're going to be walking you through every step of that process from the very beginning, what to do right after a loved one has died, all the way up through and including the final distribution of the decedent's estate. And here in part one, what we're going to do is take a very general look at probate. We'll start with defining probate. We'll talk about what it means when someone dies testate versus dying intestate. We'll talk about the differences between independent and dependent administration. Finally, we'll take a look at everything the executor is going to be doing as a part of administering a decedent's estate, and then we will talk about immediately what to do after someone has died and you are named as an executor in the will. Before we jump into today's material though, here is today's movie quote of the day.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
He told me enough. He told me you killed him.
No. I am your father.
I really don't think that one needs any kind of hints. Of course, though, if you don't know what movie that's from, then stick around until the end of the podcast and I will reveal the answer. So let's start off this series on the Texas Probate Process by first taking a look at what is probate. The actual legal definition of probate is the process of proving in a court of competent jurisdiction that an instrument is the valid last will and testament of a deceased person. In practice, though, probate is really going to be the process of winding up a person's affairs and distributing the assets of their estate, typically in accordance with the provisions of that person's will, though we will talk about what it looks like when a person dies without a will. Now, speaking of dying with or without a will, as we have discussed in some prior podcasts, a person is said to either have died testate or intestate. If a person dies with a legally valid will in place, then they are said to have died testate. That decedent's will is going to be what actually appoints the executor, and the beneficiaries of the decedent's estate will be determined by the language and provisions of the decedent's will. If an individual dies intestate, then that means they have died without a legally valid will. So instead of the person's will determining who the beneficiaries of their estate are, now we must look to the estates code to determine who the heirs and or beneficiaries of that deceased person's estate are going to be. Additionally, those heirs and or beneficiaries are going to be the ones that decide on who the administrator is going to be. If they're not able to decide, then the court, either a county court at law or a probate court, will appoint someone, and it is going to be up to the heirs and beneficiaries of the estate to determine who the independent administrator will be. If they're not able to agree on who will serve as the administrator, then the court will, of course, appoint one. In Texas, there are two general types of administrations. There is independent administration and there's also dependent administration. In an independent administration, once the will has been admitted to probate and an executor has been appointed, the court generally takes a hands-off approach. There will be some filings that the executor will need to take care of regarding notices to beneficiaries and notice to creditors, as well as an inventory of the estate. But other than that, the court is not going to be involved. This is very different from a dependent administration in which the court is going to be much more involved and essentially take a hands-on approach. In a dependent administration, the executor or administrator is required to go back to the probate court to seek permission from the court to take any actions. That might be to distribute an asset, to pay a bill, or to sell an asset. Anything the administrator wants to do, they will need the court's permission. So as you can tell, having a dependent administration is much more costly for the estate and therefore the beneficiaries than an independent administration. So of course, a discussion of the probate process needs to include a discussion on what is an executor and what is that executor going to be doing. The executor, sometimes referred to as the administrator or maybe even the personal representative of an estate, is the individual who is responsible for administering the decedent's estate and finally distributing the estate. And as one might expect, the tasks of an executor are numerous. First, though not required and not always the case, it is typically the executor who seeks to have the will admitted to probate. Once that will has been admitted to probate, they're then going to be responsible for gathering the person's property, including real property and personal property. They'll need to make sure that any final bills that were owed by the decedent are paid. This might include credit card bills or hospital bills, as well as property taxes and any final utility bills. The executor will also be responsible for making sure that the decedent's final taxes are paid, as well as making sure that the estate pays any income taxes or estate taxes that it owes. It's also possible that the executor will have to undertake other tasks, including selling certain assets of the decedent's estate, collecting insurance proceeds on the life of the decedent, dealing with retirement assets such as IRAs and 401ks, and of course, the executor will be responsible for ensuring that the beneficiaries of the estate receive their distributions in a timely and efficient manner. So first things first, let's talk about what to do to actually kick off and start the probate process. And in these podcasts and in this discussion of the probate process, we're going to be assuming that someone has, in their last will and testament, appointed you as the independent executor. The very first thing you're going to need to do is find the original estate planning documents of the decedent, wills and powers of attorney, and perhaps even trusts. You're also going to need to begin gathering asset information for the decedent's estate. You'll need to look into things like bank accounts, brokerage accounts, real property interests such as their residence. Maybe they own a ranch or they have mineral interests, which is very common for estates in Texas. You'll need to look into things like personal property such as vehicles, jewelry. You'll need to get a handle on all of this information and begin to catalog and inventory it. Eventually, you're going to need to contact and meet with an attorney to discuss the probate process and to eventually engage an attorney to represent you as the executor or administrator of the estate. The probate process in Texas, while simpler than other states, is still very complicated and there's a lot of deadlines, and so you will want to engage an attorney to assist you and represent you as the executor of an estate. At that meeting, you should discuss any immediate issues or concerns that you have. There really are no bad questions when it comes to administering someone's estate. So be sure that you ask any and every question that you have, whether it be about the process itself or a special issue that has come up as you have begun to gather the assets and information regarding the decedent's estate. And once you have met with and engaged an attorney, now the fun really begins, and we're going to start getting into all of that in our next podcast, when we're going to discuss filing the will for probate, attending the probate hearing, and the initial court filings that the executor is going to need to be aware of as they begin the estate administration process. So be sure to check back in soon as we continue our series on the Texas probate process. Before we go, though, here is the answer to the movie quote of the day, and it is from Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
He told me enough. He told me you killed him.
No. I am your father.
Well, thank y'all very much for stopping by today to check out this episode of the Estate Planning Toolbox, and be sure to check back in soon for our next episode.